"We sold your inheritance." That was the first thing my Uncle Lyle said when I walked into the room. No hello, no condolences, no acknowledgement that the house he was talking about was the only place I'd ever truly called home. He sat back in his chair, arms folded behind his head like a smug banker after closing a profitable deal. I stood across from him in my late father's favorite flannel, hands trembling, heart pounding, like I was in danger. And maybe I was. Not physical danger, but the kind that comes when everything you thought was stable suddenly isn't. The house. My father's house. The one he built with his own 2 hands in the years before I was born. Gone. "I'm sorry. What do you mean you sold it?" I asked. My voice was shaky, but firm enough to make Lyle raise an eyebrow. He smiled, like he'd been waiting for this moment. "It wasn't yours to begin with, Kaya. Your daddy left things up to us. You know how these things go." No, I didn't know how these things go. I knew my father. I knew what he told me the night before he died, that he trusted me to take care of the property, that he wanted it to stay in the family. And by family, he meant me, not Lyle or my younger brother Troy, and definitely not my mother, who hadn't lifted a finger to maintain the place in years. I stood frozen in the room I'd once danced in as a girl. My heels made soft taps on the hardwood floor my dad had polished every spring. The light from the kitchen window still hit the far wall just right, casting a warm glow that usually made me feel safe. But that day, it felt like a spotlight. And I was standing in the middle of a robbery. Except the thieves had keys, and the family name. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. I slid it across the table without saying a word. Uncle Lyle glanced at it, eyebrows creasing as he read the first line. "Last will and testament of Jeremiah Morell. You'll be in jail by tonight," I said. The words came out steady, measured, like I'd been practicing them for weeks. Because I had. Lyle's smirk vanished. His body shifted forward, elbows hitting the table. "Where did you get that?" he said, his voice tighter now. "My father gave it to me himself. 3 years ago. Notarized, witnessed, filed. You forged a false document to sell the property." He stood up like he was going to say something, maybe yell, maybe call me crazy, but he didn't, because I wasn't bluffing. And he knew it. The room fell silent except for the soft tick of the wall clock, one of the few things that hadn't been packed up or sold. I looked around and saw the ghosts of everything they tried to erase. My childhood drawings still pinned to the corkboard in the hallway, the rocking chair Dad used to sit in every night before bed, the kitchen table where we celebrated my high school graduation. Memories that had meant nothing to them, but they meant everything to me. "You should have just kept quiet, Kaya," Lyle muttered, more to himself than to me. I felt my face flush, not from fear, but from rage. "I kept quiet my whole life," I said, "while you all treated me like I didn't belong. But this was his final wish. You don't get to rewrite that." He looked like he wanted to argue, to pull the family card, the loyalty card, the "you misunderstood" card. But I had the ace, the legal one. I took a deep breath and turned toward the door. I didn't need to say anything else. The law was going to speak for me now. But before I left, I looked over my shoulder one last time. "If you ever step foot on that land again, you'll be violating a court order." And then I walked out. For the first time in my life, I didn't cry after a fight. I didn't question myself. I didn't wonder if I was being too dramatic, because I had proof. And I had my father's voice in my memory, whispering, "Protect it, Kaya. Don't let them take what's yours." And I didn't. My name is Kaya Morell, and I grew up in a 2-story farmhouse on the southern edge of Indiana, the kind of place with creaky floors, wind chimes that never stopped singing, and a backyard big enough for a dozen dreams. Most of mine were made out there, under the old pecan tree, usually with a book in my lap and my dad nearby fixing something. My father, Jeremiah Morell, was the quiet kind of man, strong in presence, soft in spirit. A blue-collar worker at the local steel mill by day, a handyman, gardener, and occasional poet by night. He smelled like cedar and gasoline, and his laugh, when it came, could fill a whole room with sunlight. He believed in fairness, hard work, and that you never turned your back on your people. Then there was my mother, Marta. We weren't close. Not really. She kept herself at a distance, both emotionally and sometimes literally, retreating into long silences or sharp words, depending on her mood. I was always too sensitive, too stubborn, or too dramatic, depending on what I questioned. And my younger brother Troy, 3 years younger, but somehow always treated like the elder. The golden child. He got away with everything. Didn't matter if he crashed Dad's truck, skipped school, or talked back to teachers. Marta would rush to defend him like a lioness protecting her cub. With me, the bar was different, higher, colder. Then there was Uncle Lyle, Dad's older brother, and a permanent fixture in our family whether we liked it or not. He lived just 20 minutes away but acted like he ran the entire county. Smooth-talking, always dressed like he was about to sign a deal. He helped my dad with the house years ago when money was tight, and I think he held that over him ever since. He always looked at me like I was an inconvenience. "Too smart for your own good," he once said when I asked about our family's land. I was 13. Still, for all the tension, our house was my safe place. My sanctuary. I spent more time in that home library than anywhere else. Dad would bring home discarded books from garage sales and library closings, and we'd catalog them together in our own system. Red dots for fiction, green for history, gold stars for poetry. It was our quiet world, one that no one else in the family seemed to care about. From a young age, I knew I wanted to open a bookstore. Not in the city, not online, not fancy. Just a small, quiet place where people could sit with coffee and words and feel less alone. I even designed a mock-up of it as a school project. Dad pinned it to his wall, right above his desk. The house itself wasn't just a place to live. It was meant to be a part of my future. I didn't need my father to promise it in words, though, eventually, he did. I was there for him when he got sick. I watched over him while Marta busied herself with errands, and Troy stayed out late, to avoid the stress. I saw the way my dad looked at them, and I saw how differently he looked at me. A month before he died, we sat on the back porch in the cool air, and he took my hand. He didn't talk much during his last days, but that night he said this: "Kaya, this land's yours." I made sure of it. Don't let anyone take it from you, not even family. I remember the pause in his voice when he said that. The weight, the unspoken warning. At the time, I didn't fully understand it. I was grieving even before I lost him. But after his funeral, after the casseroles and condolences stopped, that sentence became my compass. I left home for a while after that. Needed space, needed to breathe. I rented a small apartment in Bloomington and worked at a used bookstore. It felt right, like a temporary stillness before I could come back and build something real on the land Dad left me. I returned a year later with plans, ideas, hope. What I didn't know was that while I was gone, they had been busy, cutting deals, forging papers, and erasing my name from the only place I'd ever belonged. They thought I wouldn't fight. But they forgot who raised me. Looking back, I don't think my family ever saw me as one of them. Not fully. Not because I wasn't blood, but because I wasn't like them. Where Troy was loud, reckless, and brash, I was quiet, observant. Where my mother demanded attention, I found comfort in books and silence. Where Uncle Lyle dominated conversations, I hesitated, unsure if speaking would make things worse. We were all under the same roof, but I grew up feeling like a long-term guest in my own home. Polite smiles, dismissive glances, like I was there by convenience, not by connection. Favoritism was never openly declared in my family. It didn't have to be. It lived in the small things. Troy could skip chores and still get an allowance. I'd vacuum the whole house and get a cold. You missed a spot. If Troy failed a class, my mother blamed the teacher. If I got a B+, she'd ask, why wasn't it an A? And when I asked about college tuition, I was told to apply for scholarships, while Troy got a new gaming console. Even my father, kind and well-meaning as he was, tiptoed around their behavior. He saw it, he knew, but I think he believed love meant keeping the peace, so I learned to shrink. to disappear in plain sight. Uncle Lyle was the crown jewel of that dysfunction, a man who walked into our home like he owned the walls. He'd slap Troy on the back, call him the future of the family, and then look at me like I was a pothole on his paved road to success. He made digs when Dad wasn't listening. "Still working at that little bookstore, Kaya? That's cute." When I turned 24, I applied for a business grant to start a community reading space. Lyle laughed when he overheard me tell my dad, "A library? What are you gonna do? Read people out of poverty?" I hated how his voice would stick with me longer than his presence. How his words made me feel like I was always trying to explain myself to someone who had already decided I wasn't enough. My mother, Marta, wasn't any better. She didn't insult me outright. She just made sure I never forgot what I owed. "I gave up everything for this family," she'd say, staring right at me. "The least you could do is be grateful." Grateful for what? For the way she ignored my questions? For the way she worshipped Troy and tolerated me? I remember the first time she took Lyle's side in front of me. Dad had mentioned something about finalizing the will. He wanted to make sure everything was clear, he said. I remember sitting in the living room with the three of them, Dad, Marta, and Lyle. I was supposed to be in the kitchen, but I stayed just out of sight, listening. "She doesn't need the property," Lyle said, like he was talking about someone at a board meeting. "She's not strong enough to hold on to it. You know how she is." "She's too emotional," my mother added quietly. I remember my dad's pause. "She's my daughter." "She's not practical, Jerry," Lyle countered. "Troy can manage the land. We need someone who understands money." I walked away before I could hear more. I locked myself in the bathroom and cried until my face hurt. That conversation stayed with me for years. I learned that in my family, affection was a currency. If you didn't play the game, you didn't get paid. So I stopped trying to be loved on their terms. I started building something quieter, steadier, just for me. My bookshelf, my savings, my plans. All of it in the hope that one day I could return and reclaim what was mine. Not just the house, but the sense of belonging it represented. But dysfunction doesn't rest. It waits. It watches. And the moment Dad was gone, they finally moved in. I was out of sight. And to them, that meant I could be erased. But what they didn't count on, what they never truly understood, was that I had never needed their approval to be strong. I just needed a reason. And they gave me one. The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of a real estate listing. I wasn't even looking for it. A friend from high school, Jesse, texted me a screenshot out of the blue. "Isn't this your dad's place? Looks like it's up for sale." I thought it was a mistake, a lookalike listing, maybe an error. I clicked the link. But there it was. Our white farmhouse. Dad's porch swing still hanging. The old barn in the back that he swore he'd fix up one day. Photos of the inside too. Our kitchen, our library, even my childhood bedroom. Someone had staged it with generic furniture, but I could still see my life underneath the gloss. I called my mom. No answer. I called again. Straight to voicemail. I drove home that same afternoon, heart in my throat the entire time. 2 hours on the highway, rehearsing possibilities in my head. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe it's not finalized. Maybe it's salvageable. I pulled up to the house and felt like I'd stepped into a ghost town. A "for sale" sign swayed in the front yard. Inside, the rooms were empty. Hollow. No laughter. No scent of Dad's aftershave. No warmth. Just cold echoes where memories used to be. And standing in the middle of it all, like he was waiting for me, was Uncle Lyle. He didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, he looked pleased. "Kaya," he said, "didn't expect you this early." I didn't bother with pleasantries. "What's going on? Why is this house on the market?" He shrugged, like we were talking about the weather. "Your mother and Troy decided it was time. Property like this doesn't sit around forever. Thought we'd get ahead of things before the taxes piled up." My stomach twisted. "You don't have the right to sell this. Dad left it to me." He told me that. He smiled then. That smile I'd seen too many times before. It always meant he knew something I didn't, or thought he did. "Well," he said, walking toward me, "that's where it gets a little complicated. Turns out your dad didn't update his official will. Everything defaulted to your mother. She signed over rights to me and Troy. We took care of it. No remorse, no hesitation. Just a lie, spoken so easily it made my skin crawl." "That's not true," I whispered. "It is," he said, patting my shoulder. "And Kaya, you need to stop clinging to things that aren't yours. You've got your own life now. This place was never really for you." I pulled away from him like his touch burned. It was his wish. He told me directly. Doesn't matter what he told you if he didn't write it down. That was when something snapped in me. Not loudly, not violently, quietly, like a foundation shifting beneath your feet. I realized right then, I was being cut out, deliberately, strategically. They'd waited until I was far enough away to act without resistance. I looked around the room, bare walls, dusty floors, and I remembered the night my dad made me promise to protect this place, how fragile his voice was, how steady his eyes were. Lyle turned toward the front door. "Anyway, we've got a buyer lined up. Should close in a couple weeks. It's better this way. Time to move on." Move on? From my home? From my father's legacy? Number I walked out of that house with one mission burning in my chest. I will not let this go. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But something hardened inside me. For every year I'd been dismissed, every time I'd been made to feel invisible, this was the moment I'd remember. They wanted to bury me with Dad's memory, but they forgot something important. I had proof, and I wasn't afraid anymore. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the mattress in my rented apartment, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling while the streetlight outside cast slow-moving shadows across my walls. My phone was next to me, silent. Not a single call from my mother. Not a single text from Troy. I had walked into my childhood home and found it gutted, erased, sanitized for sale, and no one had bothered to tell me. The next morning, I woke up with that same ache in my chest, a kind of hollow anger that doesn't scream. It simmers. I sat at my tiny kitchen table with a cup of coffee I couldn't finish, staring at the manila folder I kept locked in a drawer. Dad's real will. He had given it to me 2 years before he died, tucked inside a leather portfolio, with a short note that read, "Trust your gut, kid. Keep this safe." At the time, I didn't understand the urgency in his eyes when he handed it to me. I thought maybe he was just being cautious. I didn't want to believe he knew what was coming, that the people closest to him would turn on each other like wolves. But now I knew. And the worst part? It wasn't just betrayal. It was the way they did it, quietly, efficiently, like I was never part of the plan to begin with. I tried calling my mom again, straight to voicemail. When I texted her, I kept it simple. "We need to talk. You sold the house." Her response came 4 hours later. One sentence. "It was for the best. You're too emotional about these things." That phrase, that dagger. Too emotional, always that. I wanted to scream, not because of the words, but because of how familiar they were. That was how she dismissed me growing up. That was how she minimized every instinct, every question, every boundary I tried to draw. Her way of saying, "You're overreacting. Your pain isn't valid. Sit down." I didn't sit down this time. Instead, I started remembering. I remembered the way she doted on Troy, even when he was cruel to me. I remembered how she never stepped in when Uncle Lyle mocked my dreams. I remembered holidays where I did all the cooking, and Troy got the credit. Family pictures where I was always pushed to the side. And I remembered, with razor-sharp clarity, the day my father was admitted to hospice. I had been the one who bathed him, fed him, held his hand when the morphine blurred his words. My mother left the room every time he got too weak to talk. The week he passed, she was barely there, and now she was selling off his legacy like it was a broken appliance, like it never mattered. I didn't leave my apartment for 2 days, not because I was wallowing, but because I was processing. Because grief, when mixed with betrayal, becomes something else entirely. It becomes rage, with nowhere to go. I cried on the second night. Finally, I let it all out. The grief I'd held for my father, the shame of not doing more, the guilt of leaving town even though he had told me to live my life. I punched a pillow so hard I tore the seam. I screamed into the mattress until my throat went raw. But underneath the pain, something else was forming. A line in the sand. I realized something. They had underestimated me. They had counted on my silence. They thought I'd break. But they didn't know what I'd been carrying all these years. The weight of invisibility. The wounds of being the too much daughter. The years of not being believed or heard. They didn't realize that this time, I had proof. Legal, notarized, irrefutable proof. More than that, I had resolve. That house wasn't just property. It was memory. It was love. It was my father's final act of protection. And now it would be the reason I stood up. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was preparing. Grief is a fog. It wraps around your brain, dulls your instincts, steals your words. But betrayal? Betrayal is lightning. It burns everything away and leaves you staring at the truth, with eyes wide open. That week, I stopped seeing myself as the daughter left behind. I started seeing myself as the woman my father trusted. I opened the folder every morning like a ritual. Inside were the contents of my father's real will, a clear, notarized document that left the family home and surrounding land exclusively to me. There were 2 witness signatures. One was his old friend from the steel mill. The other was our family's longtime neighbor, Miss Enid, who used to bring over pecan pies every Sunday. I read it like scripture. Every word reaffirmed something I'd almost forgotten. I was not making this up. I was not delusional. I was not emotional. I was right. Dad had trusted me with this. Not Troy. Not Mom. Certainly not Lyle. But it wasn't just the will that shifted something inside me. It was the realization that I'd spent my entire life apologizing for who I was, for being too intense, too observant, too honest, too much. And now I saw it clearly. They weren't uncomfortable with me because I was emotional. They were uncomfortable because I saw through them. I noticed things. I remembered what people said when they thought no one was listening. I asked questions they didn't want to answer. I wasn't a liability. I was a threat. And now I was done making myself smaller for their comfort. So I got to work. I started keeping notes, dates, conversations, inconsistencies. I called Miss Enid, who confirmed she remembered signing Dad's will. She even had a copy. I went to the courthouse and requested public property records. That's when I found it. A transfer of ownership filed under my mother's name, followed by a rapid sale contract to a holding company linked to Lyle's business address. It was all there. They hadn't even tried to hide it well. What they had done was illegal, fraudulent, and I had the trail to prove it. Still, the hardest part wasn't gathering the facts. It was facing the emotional truth. My family had never intended to honor my father's wishes. And not only that, they knew I would be hurt by this. They knew I loved that house, knew it was sacred to me. They didn't just ignore my grief. They used it as an opportunity. While I was healing, they were erasing me. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror one night and looked at myself. Really looked. No makeup, no filter, just a woman with dark circles under her eyes and a spark returning to her chest. "You're not the problem," I said out loud. "You were never the problem." And I believed it. That moment wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was quiet, personal, but it was the beginning of everything. I reached out to a friend of mine from college, Raina, who had gone on to law school. I didn't know what exactly I needed yet, but I knew I needed to understand my rights. She agreed to meet that weekend. I also began journaling again, something I had stopped doing when Dad died. Every page helped me make sense of the chaos. Every entry reminded me, I'm not crazy. I'm remembering. I'm waking up. The transformation wasn't overnight. It didn't come with fireworks. It came with small, defiant acts of clarity, like choosing not to respond to my mother's next text, like saying no when Troy tried to explain their side of the story, like walking into a law office with trembling hands and walking out with a plan. My family saw me as a quiet girl with a soft voice. They thought silence meant weakness. What they didn't understand was that silence can also be strategy. And now I was ready to be loud, in court, in truth, and in purpose. When I walked into Raina's apartment, I was shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. She was already waiting with 2 mugs of coffee and a highlighter behind her ear like she always did in college. We hadn't seen each other in months, but she pulled me into a hug like no time had passed. I told her everything. Not just about the forged documents, but the feeling that had haunted me my entire life. Being on the outside of my own family, the lies, the gaslighting, how I'd been made to question every gut instinct I ever had. And how this time, finally, I had something solid. Something they couldn't twist. When I pulled out the will, Dad's original, notarized, witnessed, folded with care, Raina didn't hesitate. She opened her laptop, cracked her knuckles, and said, "Let's tear them apart." That was the beginning. Within a week, I had an attorney, a probate lawyer named Helen Strauss, who specialized in estate fraud. Calm, sharp, and precise. The kind of woman who didn't waste words and didn't flinch at powerful men with forged documents. She reviewed the paperwork and said 4 words that cracked something open in my chest. "You have a case." I'd held it together until then, but I cried in her office, not out of sadness, but relief, validation. After months of confusion, anger, and silence, someone was finally listening to me. Helen got to work fast. Within days, we filed a petition to revoke the property transfer, citing fraud and concealment. She attached a cease and desist order to halt the pending sale. That meant the house couldn't be handed over to the buyer Lyle had lined up. Not yet. Then we filed a civil suit against Lyle, Troy, and my mother, naming them in the illegal transfer of estate assets and fraudulent real estate filing. It was one of the most surreal moments of my life, signing my name at the bottom of that lawsuit. I remember thinking, I'm not the invisible daughter anymore. I'm the plaintiff. We served the papers at Lyle's office. I didn't see it happen, but Raina later told me he turned pale as a ghost when he saw the court seal. Apparently he tried to laugh it off, called it a misunderstanding, but the sheriff's deputy made it clear this wasn't optional. What followed was a series of voicemails and texts from my mother, all pleading, none apologizing. "This is family business. Why are you dragging outsiders into it? You're overreacting. We didn't think you cared that much." "You always were dramatic, Kaya." I didn't reply, because I knew now silence could be a boundary. The thing about resistance is that it doesn't always look like yelling or door slamming. Sometimes it's filing a court motion. Sometimes it's letting people reveal who they are when they're backed into a corner. Sometimes it's choosing facts over feelings, truth over nostalgia. And here's what started happening. People noticed. My dad's old friend from the steel mill called me after hearing the news through the grapevine. He said, "Your father used to brag about you. Said you were the only one who actually listened." Miss Enid baked me a pie and slipped a handwritten note inside the box. "He always said you had more backbone than all of them put together." Glad to see he was right. The lies began to unravel in public, not just in court. I knew Lyle had gotten comfortable manipulating people behind closed doors, but court documents don't lie. Signatures can be verified, notarizations are time-stamped, and that holding company he used to move the house, it was registered in his name. Sloppy, arrogant. The legal process was long, exhausting, and expensive, but it gave me something I hadn't felt in years. Control. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was directing, strategizing, fighting with evidence and boundaries instead of tears and begging. And for the first time, I realized something powerful. They didn't take everything from me, because they never had me to begin with. They had a version of me they could control. That version is gone. This version, she files lawsuits. Lyle thought he could spin his way out of it. That's the first thing I noticed when he called and said, Let's talk. He sounded calm, confident, like he was still in control of the board, and I was just a piece on it. He invited me to have a conversation at my mother's house, said we could settle things like family. I almost laughed out loud, but I went, not to settle, to end it. When I walked into that house, the air was thick with fake civility. Troy sat on the couch with his arms crossed, trying to look bored. My mother stood by the fireplace, her hands tight around a coffee cup she hadn't sipped. Lyle was at the dining table, right where my father used to sit. That alone made my blood boil. "Kaya," he said with that smooth, rehearsed tone. "Glad you came. We've all been under a lot of stress." "Cut the crap," I said. "This isn't a family meeting. It's a legal confrontation you're trying to stage in your favor." His smile wavered just a little. Troy scoffed. "You're seriously going to take this to court? Over some old house?" "It's not just a house," I snapped. "It's Dad's legacy, and you stole it." My mother opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand. "No more lies. I have the will. I have the court filings. I have evidence of everything. The forged transfer, the holding company, your signatures. And now a judge does too." Lyle leaned back in his chair like he was about to deliver a lecture. "You're emotional, Kaya. You're letting your feelings cloud your judgment." There it was again. Emotional. Dramatic. Irrational. "I'm not emotional," I said. "I'm prepared." And then I did what I'd been rehearsing in my head for days. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder, slid it across the table, let it land with a sound that felt heavier than thunder. Lyle looked down and froze. The will, Dad's signature, witnesses, notarized, legal gold. He didn't even touch it. My mother stepped forward. "Kaya, your father didn't mean for it to be like this." I looked her in the eyes. "He meant exactly for it to be like this. He knew you'd try to take it. That's why he gave the original to me." She blinked, stunned, maybe for the first time, realizing I wasn't bluffing. I turned to Lyle. "You committed fraud, Lyle. You filed a forged deed, transferred property without consent, and tried to cover it up by funneling it through a shell company. That's criminal, and you're not going to sweet-talk your way out of this one." Troy stood up suddenly, like he wanted to intimidate me. "You're seriously going to send your family to jail? Are you that cold?" "No," I said, stepping forward. "I'm going to let a judge decide what justice looks like. I'm just making sure the truth is in the room." Then I said the words that landed like a hammer. "You'll be in jail by tonight." Lyle's face went white. For a second, just a second, I saw panic. That arrogant composure cracked, and the smirk died. He looked around the room like someone might save him, but no one said a word. My mother sat down, quietly. Troy walked out. And Lyle? He said nothing, because he knew it was over. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to cry. I had the power of truth. And for the first time in my life, they knew it too. I turned to leave. "Kaya," my mother called out softly. "Wait." I paused at the doorway, but didn't turn around. "Your father loved you," she said. "I know," I replied. "That's why I'm still standing." And then I walked out of the house they tried to erase me from, as the one person Dad had trusted most. The daughter who didn't just remember. The daughter who refused to disappear. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not just in temperature, in tone. It was clinical, impersonal, filled with echoes and fluorescent lights. But I didn't let that distract me. I sat in the front row with my attorney, Helen, a legal pad on my lap, my father's will carefully tucked into a navy blue binder. Lyle sat across the aisle, flanked by his lawyer. He wore a crisp blazer that looked more expensive than honest. Troy wasn't there. My mother was, but she kept her eyes down the entire time, like she wasn't sure which side she wanted to sit on. The judge, a tall woman with reading glasses and a no-nonsense voice, called the session to order. I thought I'd be nervous, but I wasn't. because this wasn't just about property. It was about my father's word, my identity, my right to be believed. And I had proof. Helen presented the original will. She read the signatures aloud, submitted notarization records, played voicemail evidence from our neighbor confirming her witness testimony. She handed over copies of the deed transfer linked to Lyle's holding company and documents showing how it bypassed legal probate channels. She didn't raise her voice once. She didn't have to. The facts did all the shouting. Lyle's attorney tried to argue the will was outdated, said my father may have changed his mind. But when the judge asked for any updated will or legal amendment, they had nothing. Just assumptions. Hearsay, shrugs dressed in suits. And then came the moment I'll never forget. The judge looked over the documents again, quietly flipping through pages. The room was dead silent. Then she said, "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff." My heart stopped. She continued, "The property in question was improperly transferred under fraudulent means. The original will shall be honored. Ownership is hereby reverted to Kaya Morel. The defendants will face a separate hearing on charges of estate fraud and perjury." My hands were shaking, but I held my chin high. Across the aisle, Lyle slumped back in his chair, defeated. My mother covered her mouth with one hand. For the first time, I saw regret on her face. Not guilt. Just regret, the kind that comes when your plan collapses in public. I didn't gloat. I didn't look at them for validation. I looked at the judge and I whispered, "Thank you." Because it wasn't just a legal victory. It was symbolic. It was the moment the truth became official. The house was mine, legally, ethically, spiritually. Every inch of that land now bore my name, not just in memory, but in record. The world could see what my father already knew. I was the rightful heir. And more than that, I had protected what he left behind. After the hearing, Helen shook my hand firmly and said, "You did everything right. He'd be proud of you." I nodded, but I couldn't speak. My throat tightened with a lump I didn't expect. I had stayed so strong for so long, through silence, gaslighting, manipulation, but in that moment my armor cracked. Not because I was broken, but because I was finally safe. Later that evening I drove to the house. My house, the "for sale" sign was gone. The locks had been changed, and in my hand I held the title, the official deed now under my name. I walked through every room slowly, touched the walls, ran my fingers along the banister Dad had built, sat down in the corner of the library, and just breathed. Then I opened the binder with the will one last time. On the first page, right below his name, was my father's handwriting. "Kaya, protect what matters. You always see the truth." I pressed my fingers to the ink, closed my eyes. I had done what he asked. This wasn't just a win in court. It was a message to every person who tried to erase me, silence me, dismiss me. I am not disposable. I am not forgettable. I am not afraid. This was justice, and it had my father's signature on it. In the weeks after the court ruling, something unexpected began to happen. People started showing up. Not the ones you'd expect. Not the ones with my last name or shared blood. Those doors stayed closed. My mother went quiet. Troy didn't message me. And Lyle? His attorney sent a vague letter about appealing the ruling, but I knew it was bluff. His smirk had vanished. The fight was over. But in their absence, real people stepped forward. Raina was the first. She stopped by the house the day after the court hearing with a grocery bag full of essentials and a stack of law books she no longer needed. "I know you can breathe now," she said, setting the bag on the counter. "But don't stop fighting. That house is yours. But your peace? You'll have to protect that too." She didn't say it like a warning. She said it like a friend who understood what kind of scars get reopened around people who once claimed to love you. I hugged her and didn't let go for a long time. Then came Miss Enid. She shuffled up the porch steps, carrying a fresh-baked lemon pie and a folded quilt under one arm. "Your dad gave me that will because he trusted me to do the right thing," she said. "You did better than right, Kaya. You made him proud." She handed me the quilt. It was one she and my father had worked on years ago, patchwork pieces made from old shirts and denim scraps. In one corner there was a piece of fabric I recognized immediately, one of my childhood dresses. "I saved it for you," she said. "You always knew where home was." Then there was Mr. Halstead, the old librarian from my high school. He showed up on a random Wednesday with a box of books he said were pulled from the donation bin. "You building that community library yet?" he asked, winking. "Because when you do, I want my name on the donor's wall, even if all I gave you was water-stained copies of Steinbeck and Toni Morrison." I laughed so hard I cried. And my landlord from Bloomington, a quiet man who barely spoke above a whisper, mailed me back my security deposit along with a handwritten note. "I heard what your uncle did. Nobody who fights for what's right should have to fight alone. Good luck in the next chapter." Mr. Phelps. That was when it hit me. I had never been alone. Not really. I had been surrounded by people who didn't always have a loud voice, but who saw me, heard me, believed me. They weren't the ones who brought casseroles after a funeral or posted Facebook tributes. They were the ones who checked in quietly, gave generously, and reminded me I was never invisible to them. These people didn't love me because they had to. They loved me because they chose to. They showed up without being asked, not because of obligation or guilt, but because truth attracts truth. And when you start standing in yours, it pulls the right people toward you. I started spending afternoons on the porch again, just like I used to with Dad. I brought out a folding table and left a little stack of books by the rocking chair with a handwritten sign that said, "Take one. Leave one. Come sit a while." And people did. Neighbors I hadn't seen in years dropped by with old books and stories about my father. One woman said he once changed her tire in the snow without telling anyone. Another said he helped pay her son's school fees when she lost her job. Every story stitched something new into the memory of him. And every moment on that porch stitched something back into me. For so long, I thought I had to carry it all alone. That asking for help was weakness. That strength meant silence. But I learned that strength is letting people hold you when you can't hold yourself. It's letting yourself be seen. It's letting love in, even if it comes from unexpected places. I lost a family, but I found a community. And in that, I found something even stronger than blood. I found belonging. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. People who manipulate others rely on silence. They count on your shame, your fear, your reluctance to make a scene. But when that silence ends, the truth does more damage than any confrontation ever could. The day after the court ruling, word spread fast, faster than I expected. It started in whispers at the local diner, then in church pews, and eventually it hit social media. I didn't post anything dramatic, just a single photo. The deed, my name. A caption that read, "My father trusted me." The court did too. Within hours, my inbox flooded. Messages from people I barely knew. Some from childhood classmates, others from neighbors, even a few from my father's old co-workers. Most of them said the same thing. We always knew something was off with Lyle. Turns out my uncle's shady dealings went further than just my inheritance. One man messaged me saying Lyle had pressured him into selling a piece of farmland for the good of the family, only to flip it for triple the price. Another woman said Lyle promised to help with her mother's estate and somehow walked away with the car title and half the furniture. No one had taken him to court. Until I did. And once I did, everyone started remembering. It wasn't long before the local paper reached out. A small column tucked between city council updates and high school sports, but the headline was enough. "Family property fraud case exposes pattern of abuse." They quoted a portion of the ruling, used my name, mentioned Lyle by full name. That was the real punishment, not jail, which he may or may not face depending on the fraud charges, but the public exposure. The stripping of the mask he wore so well. No more handshakes at the Rotary Club. No more "Lyle can help you with that" referrals. He was tainted now, by facts, by court records, by his own arrogance. My mother didn't fare much better. While she wasn't charged, her name was still in the lawsuit. Her complicity was clear. People started asking questions. Friends she once gossiped with at church started keeping their distance. Someone even asked her publicly, "Didn't you say Jeremiah wanted Kaya to have the house?" She left early that day. I heard from a neighbor. Troy, meanwhile, posted some passive-aggressive story on Instagram about fake family and their lawyers. He was never one for accountability, but his silence afterward said more than any words could. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because here's the thing. The truth didn't need defending anymore. It was standing tall in court records, confirmed by witnesses, sealed with signatures. It had its own voice now, one that couldn't be silenced or manipulated or buried beneath guilt. And while none of them publicly apologized, not one of them, the community around them stopped playing along. No more nods, no more invitations, no more loyalty based on history instead of integrity. They had relied on their version of the story for so long, and now that version was dead. At one point, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten, no return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. My mother's. All it said was, "I didn't know what else to do. I thought it was the best choice for everyone. I didn't think it would come to this." I folded it once and tucked it into a drawer. Not because I forgave her. Not yet. But because even cowardice deserves to be witnessed. Their exposure wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about humiliation. It was about truth reclaiming space that had once been poisoned by lies. For years, they had told the world I was difficult, that I was emotional, that I didn't understand how things worked. But the truth, when brought into the light, proved that I was the one paying attention, that I was the one who remembered, that I was the one who honored my father when they only used his death to profit. Their masks cracked, and underneath, just people terrified of being seen. After everything, the silence felt different. Not heavy, not suffocating, peaceful. For the first time in years, I wasn't holding my breath. The lawsuits were behind me. The house was mine. The community had seen the truth for what it was. My family, the ones who tried to take it all, had been exposed and stripped of the story they had told for so long. But closure doesn't come from a gavel. It doesn't arrive in the form of a court ruling or a headline or a smirk erased from someone's face. Closure comes from choice, and I had to make mine. For weeks after the final hearing, people kept asking if I'd ever speak to my mother again, if I'd let Troy apologize, if Lyle ever reached out. He didn't, by the way. But that's not the question I was asking myself. What I really wanted to know was this. Who am I now, without their lies holding me back? The answer came slowly, like sunlight slipping through blinds in the morning. I realized I was no longer someone trying to earn a place at their table. I wasn't the extra child anymore, the emotional one, the black sheep trying to prove I deserved to belong. I belonged to myself now. My worth wasn't up for debate, not by blood, not by betrayal, not by history. I started rebuilding my life not out of anger, but out of clarity. Every room I restored in the house was like reclaiming a part of myself they tried to erase. I painted the walls. I refinished the floorboards my dad had laid with his own hands. I found photos I'd thought were lost. Old Polaroids of me and him on the front steps, books stacked between us, both smiling. That's who I was doing this for. Not just me. Him. My father raised me to be fair, to be kind, but not to be a fool. And that's where I draw the line now. Kindness with boundaries, compassion with discernment. Love, but never at the cost of my dignity. I stopped chasing people who were never going to choose me. That included family. And that's a hard sentence to accept, even when it's true. But letting go doesn't mean you hate someone. It just means you finally love yourself enough to stop bleeding for people who'd never bandage your wounds. And through that, I discovered a new kind of family. Not the one I was born into, but the one I built. Raina, who stood beside me from the first moment. Miss Enid, who reminded me that love doesn't expire when someone dies. Mr. Halstead, who still sends me dog-eared books with post-it notes in the margins. Even the quiet neighbors, the local grocer who gave me free apples after the story came out. The barista who slipped a note into my coffee sleeve that read, "Thank you for standing up. People are watching and learning." That was the moment I realized this story was no longer just mine. I wasn't just reclaiming property. I was reclaiming agency. I was standing for every person who'd ever been silenced, minimized, told they were too much, or too emotional, or too sensitive to see things clearly. Turns out, I saw everything clearly. They tried to twist the truth, but truth has a way of surviving the darkest places. You just have to be brave enough to carry it. And now, I live by a few simple values. Tell the truth. Protect your peace. Love fiercely, but wisely. And never let anyone convince you that loyalty means self-abandonment. I still think of my dad every day. I still hear his voice when I walk through the house. And I know, deep down, he didn't just leave me a home. He left me a lesson. He believed in me before I had a reason to believe in myself. And now, every time I unlock the door to that house, I remind myself, this was never about revenge. It was about respect, for myself, for him, and for the truth. There's something sacred about starting over, especially in a space they tried to take from you. For weeks after the court decision, I found myself walking the halls of the house just to hear my own footsteps. There was a strange comfort in the creaks of the old floorboards, the rattle of the pipes, the silence between rooms. It didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt honest. This house, which they had emptied and nearly erased, became the canvas for something entirely mine. I started small, a fresh coat of paint in the library, a rug in my father's old study, new curtains in the kitchen, soft yellow ones like the ones my grandmother used to sew. I kept the porch swing, Dad's favorite spot, and replaced the rusted chains with new ones. The swing creaked less now, but still moved with the same rhythm. And in the corner of the living room, I set up something I'd dreamed about since I was a girl. A tiny book nook, free and open to the community. Just a few wooden shelves, a beanbag chair, a basket of bookmarks, and a handwritten sign that said, "Welcome to Jeremiah's Corner. Take a book, leave a book, stay as long as you like." The first visitors were curious kids from next door. They came shyly at first, peeking through the porch screen, asking if they had to pay. I said, "Nope, just tell me your favorite story when you're done." Soon after, people started leaving their own books. A local teacher donated 2 boxes of novels. Raina dropped off some law books and sticky notes with quotes scribbled in the margins. Even Miss Enid brought in a copy of The Secret Garden with a little dedication on the inside flap. To Kaya, for reclaiming what others tried to bury. I didn't need a grand opening. Word of mouth was enough. People came not just for the books, but for the space, for the quiet, for the feeling that maybe, in a world spinning too fast, there was still a corner where they could belong. In that way, the house became something more than a home. It became a legacy. Not the kind built on inheritance or nameplates or legal documents, but the kind built on intention. On love passed forward. On pain turned into purpose. I started journaling again, too. Writing about grief, about strength, about how rebuilding isn't about pretending nothing happened. It's about choosing to grow because something happened. I began drafting a small book, part memoir, part reflection, called The Daughter Who Stayed. It's messy, vulnerable, unfinished. Just like me. But it's the most honest thing I've ever written. Rebuilding isn't always dramatic. Most days are quiet. I fix leaky faucets. I sand old wood. I make tea and read poems out loud just to fill the silence. Some days I cry, some days I don't. But every day I choose to stay. And with each passing week, I feel more like the woman my father believed I could be. Independent, compassionate, unshakable. The woman who didn't just fight for a house, but created a home. The bookstore dream is still alive, too. I've started the paperwork to register as a nonprofit reading space. I want to host poetry nights, book clubs for single moms, literacy workshops for kids. Not because I need to be anyone's hero, but because I know what it feels like to be forgotten. And no one deserves that. There's beauty in building something out of what others tried to destroy. Because when you choose healing over hate, peace over bitterness, and purpose over pain, you win in ways they'll never understand. And every time I see a neighbor curled up in the book nook, or hear laughter echoing through the walls again, I know this house was never meant to be sold. It was meant to become. It happened on a Sunday. I had just finished sweeping the porch and was placing a new pot of flowers on the windowsill, daffodils, my dad's favorite, when I noticed a familiar car pulling into the driveway. My mother's. She parked slowly, cautiously, like someone approaching a grave instead of a house. I didn't move right away. I just stood there, broom in hand, heart somewhere between my ribs and my throat. She stepped out wearing a beige coat I hadn't seen in years. She looked smaller than I remembered. Older, or maybe just finally human. "Kaya," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. I nodded once. "Mom." We stood there in silence for a few seconds. The wind picked up. A bird landed on the porch railing. Life went on around us, indifferent to the emotional earthquake happening on the steps of a quiet farmhouse. "I don't expect anything," she said. "I just wanted to see the house." Her voice cracked on the word house, and that surprised me more than her visit. I'd grown up thinking of her as steel, unbending, untouchable, always composed. But in that moment, she wasn't any of those things. She was just a woman who had made choices. I stepped aside and opened the screen door. She walked in slowly, like she was stepping into a memory. Her eyes moved over the living room, the newly painted walls, the shelves of books, the table I had refinished myself. When she saw the corner labeled Jeremiah's Corner, she paused. Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak. After a long pause, she turned to me. "He would have liked this," she said softly. I didn't respond, because I wasn't ready to make it easy for her. After everything she had done, signing over my father's will without telling me, siding with Lyle, gaslighting me about my own place in the family, it wasn't going to be a simple storybook reunion. She didn't ask for forgiveness, and I didn't offer it. But she did say one thing that stayed with me. "I wasn't strong enough to stand up to him," she admitted, her voice trembling. "To Lyle. To your brother. Even to myself. I thought keeping the peace was the same as keeping the family. I see now, I lost both. That hurt in a different way. Not like betrayal, more like grief for a mother I never really had. "I needed you to protect me," I said quietly. "You chose not to." "I know." She sat down on the edge of the couch, her hands folded tightly, the way she used to when she was waiting for bad news. "I kept trying to make you smaller," she said, "because I thought if you took up less space, they'd love you more. Or at least hate you less." I looked at her then. Really looked. She wasn't asking for a second chance. She was asking to be heard. That I could offer. "I don't hate you," I said. "But I'm building something now. And it doesn't run on guilt or shame or silence. If you want to be part of that, there have to be boundaries." She nodded slowly. "I understand." We didn't hug. We didn't cry. This wasn't a movie. This was real life, messy, guarded, tentative. But before she left, she reached into her purse and handed me a small envelope. "I found this in his things," she said. "It was addressed to you. I never opened it." After she left, I sat on the porch with the letter in my hands. It was my father's handwriting. Inside was a simple note. "If they ever try to take this from you, fight like hell. But when it's over, let yourself live. You deserve to live." I cried then, harder than I had in months. Not because my mother had come back, but because my father had never really left. And for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, reconciliation doesn't always mean trust restored or wounds erased. Sometimes it just means leaving the door unlocked, not wide open, just ajar, enough to let in the possibility of something better. This story doesn't end with a dramatic reunion or a perfect resolution. There's no parade, no apology video, no perfect family photo where everyone suddenly understands each other. But that's not how real life works. Real life ends in the quiet, in the choices you make when no one's watching, in the peace you create for yourself, not the one you're handed. One evening, a few months after everything, the lawsuit, the confrontation, the slow, strange silence from my family, I was sitting on the porch just as the sun dipped below the trees. The sky was soft and pink, the kind of color that makes you believe things can start again. In my lap was a cup of tea. Beside me, a copy of a book I hadn't read since childhood. In the yard, a group of neighborhood kids played tag beneath the pecan tree, where I once read aloud to my dad. The house was quiet, but it was a good kind of quiet, a chosen kind. I leaned back in the swing, the same swing where my father used to sip his coffee and listen to the birds, and I thought about how far I'd come. I had lost a family, but I had gained myself. I'd faced down the people who raised me and told me I didn't belong, and I proved them wrong, not with screaming or vengeance, but with evidence, truth, and conviction. I had let go of the need for their approval. I had stopped trying to fix people who were comfortable breaking me. And I had finally understood the most important lesson my father ever gave me. You do not owe loyalty to those who betrayed your trust. You owe loyalty to yourself, to your peace, to your truth. It's funny how the story everyone thought would destroy me, the difficult daughter, the emotional one, the girl who couldn't let it go, became the story that made me whole. I didn't just reclaim a house. I reclaimed my voice. I reclaimed every piece of myself I had been told was too much or too inconvenient. And now I live differently. I say no more easily. I draw boundaries without guilt. I don't chase people who choose to misunderstand me. I speak up, not for revenge, but for the girl I used to be. The one who sat in her room wondering why love always felt so conditional. She deserved to be protected. And now she is, by me. So if you're watching this, and you've been told to stay quiet, if you've been made to feel crazy for trusting your gut, if your family tried to sell off your voice, your value, your place, I want you to hear this clearly. You're not crazy. You're remembering. You're waking up. And it's not too late to fight back. Even if your voice shakes. Even if you're standing alone. Even if the people who hurt you never say sorry. You can still reclaim what's yours. Your story. Your power. Your peace. And when you do, there's a quiet kind of victory waiting for you. Not loud. Not public. Just yours. Mine came on a porch swing, under the pink Indiana sky, with a breeze brushing past my face, and a whole life ahead of me. And in that moment I realized something. They thought they buried me. But really, they planted me. And now, I'm blooming. If this story made something inside you stir, if it reminded you of your own family, your own silence, your own fight, I want to hear from you. Drop your story in the comments. DM me. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded. You are not alone. You are not powerless. You are not too emotional. You are enough, and you always have been. Thank you for listening.